Tonight, before you fall asleep, imagine this: no street lights, no phone, no electricity, and outside your tiny wooden house, complete darkness. Not the kind of darkness we know today. I mean the kind so deep that people genuinely believed something evil was hiding inside it. In medieval times, nights were terrifyingly quiet. A single footstep outside could make your heart stop. A dog barking in the distance might mean a thief, or worse. And if someone knocked on your door after midnight, most people would rather pretend they were dead than answer it. Because once the sun disappeared, the world changed. Tonight, we're diving into the strange and deeply unsettling reality of ancient nights, and why humans feared darkness for thousands of years. But first, I'm curious, where are you watching from tonight? And what time is it for you right now? Drop your country and local time in the comments below. I love seeing where these sleepy history journeys reach around the world. And if you enjoy relaxing history videos with creepy, fascinating stories to fall asleep to, make sure to subscribe before we begin. Now, dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's step into the silence of the ancient night. If you were suddenly dropped into a medieval town after sunset, the very first thing you would notice wouldn't be the cold, the smell, or even the silence. It would be the darkness, real darkness, the kind modern humans almost never experience anymore. Today, even in the middle of the night, your world still glows. Street lamps buzz outside your window. Tiny LED lights blink from chargers and televisions. Cars pass by. Apartment windows shine in the distance. Even your phone quietly lights up the room, every few minutes like a tiny artificial moon. But 1,000 years ago, once the sun vanished, the world practically ceased to exist. Entire towns were swallowed whole by blackness, so thick that people genuinely believed evil things moved inside it. And honestly, after hearing what nights were actually like back then, you might have believed it too. The average medieval person hated nighttime, not in the cozy, I'm scared of horror movies kind of way. I mean true primal fear, because nighttime wasn't peaceful to them. It was dangerous. During the day, at least you could see your enemies coming. At night, anything could be standing a few feet away from you, and you'd never know. A thief, a murderer, a starving animal, or according to many people at the time, a demon. That fear was deeply embedded into everyday life. Parents terrified children with stories about creatures wandering after dark. Priests warned people that Satan worked hardest at night. Villagers avoided forests after sunset because they believed spirits gathered there once daylight disappeared. Even the sounds of ordinary animals became horrifying when heard in total darkness. A distant owl, rustling leaves, dogs barking somewhere beyond the trees. And here's the creepy part. Medieval nights were also unbelievably quiet. Not peaceful quiet, oppressive quiet. Modern humans are constantly surrounded by background noise without realizing it. Refrigerators hum, air conditioners buzz, distant traffic never fully stops. Somewhere, someone is always awake. But back then, after midnight, entire towns could become almost completely silent. No engines, no machines, no glowing convenience stores open 24 hours. Just darkness, and the occasional sound of wood creaking inside old homes. Many medieval houses were made from timber frames that shifted and groaned constantly as temperatures changed at night. Imagine lying awake in complete darkness, hearing your own walls crack softly around you while wind slipped through tiny openings in the wood. No wonder people started believing their houses were haunted. And people absolutely did believe in ghosts. Medieval Europe was overflowing with superstition. Many genuinely thought spirits walked the earth after sunset. Some believed demons sat on sleeping people's chests at night, causing terrifying nightmares and sleep paralysis. In fact, one of the old explanations for sleep paralysis was that an evil entity called a night hag climbed onto your body while you slept. Imagine waking up unable to move in total darkness, while believing a demon was physically sitting on your chest. Terrifying. And honestly, even today, sleep paralysis is horrifying. Now imagine experiencing it while living in a world where everyone around you fully believed demons were real. That wasn't fiction to them. It was reality. But the darkness itself wasn't even the worst part. The problem was what darkness allowed people to do. Crime exploded at night in many medieval cities because there was almost no visibility. London, Paris, Rome, all of them became far more dangerous after sunset. Streets were narrow, muddy, and filled with hidden corners. There were no cameras, no police patrol cars, no emergency phone calls. If someone attacked you in the dark, you were basically on your own. In some towns, night watchmen walked the streets, carrying bells or lanterns, while shouting the time aloud every hour, not only to warn people about fires or thieves, but also simply to remind citizens that someone was still awake out there. Think about how creepy that job must have been, walking alone through pitch black, medieval streets at 2 a.m., carrying a tiny candle while everyone else locked themselves indoors, praying nothing followed them home. And speaking of candles, people feared fire almost as much as darkness itself. Medieval homes were basically giant fire hazards. Most houses were made of dry wood packed tightly together. One knocked-over candle could wipe out entire neighborhoods. This meant families often tried to conserve candlelight as much as possible, because candles were expensive and dangerous. Poorer households sometimes sat in near darkness for hours to save money. Imagine trying to cook dinner, repair clothes, or care for children while relying on a single flickering flame. Shadows moved constantly across walls. Every object looked distorted. Human faces became eerie under candlelight. There's a reason, Ghost. Stories feel creepier with candles instead of electric lights. Our brains evolved for thousands of years, associating flickering firelight with uncertainty and danger. And here's a shocking fact most people never think about. Medieval nights were actually darker than ours, in a biological sense too. Modern humans rarely experience true darkness, because artificial light constantly affects our eyes and brains. But ancient people lived under natural cycles. On moonless nights, visibility could become almost non-existent. If clouds covered the sky, people sometimes couldn't even see their own hands clearly outdoors. Travelers could easily lose roads entirely after sunset. Falling into ditches, rivers, or forests was common. Some people simply refused to travel at night unless absolutely necessary. And honestly, smart choice. Roads were dangerous enough during daytime. At night they became death traps. One of the strangest parts of medieval nighttime was how differently people slept. Today, most people expect one long block of uninterrupted sleep. But historians discovered that many medieval Europeans actually slept in two separate phases. They called them first sleep and second sleep. After a few hours of sleep, people often woke up naturally around midnight and stayed awake for 1 or 2 hours before sleeping again. And what did they do during this creepy middle-of-the-night period? Well, a little bit of everything. Some prayed, some smoked pipes, some talked quietly with family members, some visited neighbors, some even committed crimes. Imagine waking up at 1 a.m. in your freezing medieval house while the world outside remains completely silent and black. No internet, no TV, no music. Just your thoughts, and darkness pressing against the walls. And because nights felt so dangerous, humans developed strange habits for protection. Entire families often slept together in one room, sometimes even in one bed. Not because they were affectionate, but because being alone at night felt terrifying. Wealthier households sometimes had servants sleep nearby for safety. Travelers frequently shared beds with complete strangers in crowded inns because private rooms were rare and expensive. Imagine lying inches away from someone you'd never met before while hearing storms batter the windows outside. And yes, this happened constantly. Privacy was a luxury most people simply didn't have. Weather made everything worse. Rainstorms at night in medieval times must have felt apocalyptic. Thunder shook wooden houses violently. Wind howled through cracks in walls. Candles blew out unexpectedly. Roads transformed into rivers of mud. And unlike modern people, medieval villagers couldn't just check weather forecasts. Storms appeared suddenly and felt supernatural. Some people genuinely believed thunder was proof of divine anger. Lightning strikes terrified entire communities because they frequently caused deadly fires. In fact, church bells were sometimes rung during storms because people believed the sound could drive away demons hidden inside thunderclouds, which honestly sounds ridiculous today. But when you're standing in complete darkness hearing the sky explode above your village, your brain starts accepting all kinds of strange explanations. Animals became nightmare fuel too. Wolves were one of Europe's greatest fears for centuries. And while wolf attacks on humans were rarer than legends suggest, hearing wolves howl outside a village at night absolutely terrified people. Dogs barking suddenly could send entire households into panic. Horses became skittish in darkness. Even harmless animals sounded threatening after midnight. Medieval people weren't protected from nature the way modern humans are. Wild animals still felt close. Forests still felt alive. Darkness belonged to creatures, not people. But maybe the most psychologically disturbing thing about ancient nights was this. Humans had no way to escape their thoughts. Modern people distract themselves constantly. If you feel anxious at night, you scroll social media, watch videos, text friends, turn on music. Medieval people had none of that. When darkness fell, many simply sat with their fears. And in a deeply religious and superstitious society that could become mentally exhausting, thoughts about sin, demons, death, disease, and divine punishment haunted people constantly. Medieval Europe was filled with sudden death from plague, childbirth, starvation, and war. Almost everyone knew someone who had died horribly. At night, those memories came crawling back. And honestly, maybe that's why humans feared ancient nights so deeply. Darkness forced people to confront how fragile they really were. A tiny flame separated safety from danger. A locked wooden door separated life from death. Beyond that door stretched miles of darkness nobody could control. And for thousands of years, humans stared into that darkness, imagining monsters staring back. Because sometimes, the scariest thing about ancient nights wasn't what people saw. It was what they couldn't see at all. For modern people, sleep is usually treated like comfort. You crawl into bed, maybe check your phone one last time, turn off the lights, and drift off, knowing you'll probably wake up safe in the morning. Medieval people did not feel that way at all. In fact, going to sleep every night was strangely dangerous. And once you understand how people actually slept hundreds of years ago, you'll realize bedtime used to be one of the most vulnerable moments of human existence. Because when darkness fell in the medieval world, your body wasn't entering rest. It was entering uncertainty. First of all, medieval bedrooms barely resembled what we think of as bedrooms today. Most ordinary families didn't have separate sleeping spaces. Entire households often slept together in one cramped room. Parents, children, grandparents, servants, sometimes even animals, all crowded into the same space for warmth and protection. Privacy barely existed. Poor families frequently shared straw mattresses laid directly on wooden floors, and those mattresses were disgusting. Straw bedding absorbed sweat, dirt, urine, mold, fleas, lice, and bed bugs over time. Washing bedding properly was difficult and expensive, meaning many people slept inside what was basically a nest of parasites. Historians found records describing beds literally moving because of infestations. Imagine lying down exhausted after a brutal day of labor, only to feel insects crawling across your skin in total darkness. And then there were the bed bugs. Medieval bed bugs were a nightmare. Without modern pest control, infestations became almost impossible to eliminate. People woke up covered in bites constantly. Some wealthy households tried burning herbs or using smoke to drive insects away, but most people simply endured it. In fact, one shocking medieval belief claimed bedbugs could actually be medicinal if crushed and consumed for certain illnesses, which honestly sounds less like medicine and more like psychological warfare. But that's how desperate people were. Sleep wasn't peaceful. It was itchy, uncomfortable, cold, and often miserable. Temperature made things even worse. Medieval homes were freezing during winter. And I don't mean my apartment is chilly, freezing. I mean seeing your own breath indoors. Many houses had poor insulation, thin walls, and tiny windows. Heating entire homes was nearly impossible for ordinary families because firewood was expensive. So at night, people piled together for body warmth. Sometimes several unrelated, travelers shared the same bed in inns, simply because surviving cold mattered more than comfort. There are actual records of complete strangers sleeping shoulder to shoulder in crowded beds, while rats ran across floors nearby. Romantic medieval aesthetics suddenly feel a lot less romantic when you picture that. And here's something deeply unsettling. Many people genuinely feared dying in their sleep. Sudden death during the night was common enough that bedtime carried a strange psychological weight. Disease spread rapidly. Breathing problems, infections, fevers, and heart issues went untreated. People could go to sleep seemingly normal and simply never wake up. Since medicine barely understood the human body, nighttime deaths often felt mysterious and terrifying. Families sometimes interpreted sudden death as supernatural punishment or demonic activity. Imagine waking up beside a relative who quietly died hours earlier, while everyone slept in the same room. That happened more often than people like to admit. The medieval obsession with dreams made nighttime even creepier. Today, we mostly treat dreams as weird brain activity. Medieval people often believed dreams carried messages from God or the devil. Nightmares weren't considered harmless imagination. They were warnings, temptations, or supernatural attacks. Some believed demons entered sleeping minds, specifically to corrupt people through sinful dreams. Religious texts warned against lustful dreams. Others believed seeing dead relatives in dreams meant spirits were visiting from the afterlife. Imagine waking up terrified after a nightmare and genuinely believing an evil entity had entered your room during sleep. That fear stayed with people constantly. And then there's sleep paralysis, one of the creepiest human experiences ever. Medieval societies had absolutely no scientific explanation for it. People woke unable to move, often sensing pressure on their chest or a dark figure nearby. Across Europe, terrifying legends emerged describing creatures attacking sleepers at night. In England, they blamed night hags. In other places, demons, witches, or shadow spirits were blamed. Some people became utterly convinced evil beings physically visited them while they slept. Honestly, if you experience sleep paralysis inside a dark medieval room lit only by dying candlelight, you'd probably believe it too. One especially disturbing fact about medieval sleep is how vulnerable homes really were at night. Doors were weak, locks were primitive, windows were tiny openings covered with shutters or cloth. If criminals wanted to break inside, there wasn't much stopping them. Wealthier households sometimes hired guards or servants specifically to stay awake overnight. Poor families relied mostly on luck, dogs, or neighbors hearing screams. Imagine trying to sleep while knowing someone could potentially force their way into your home at any moment. That low-level anxiety shaped how people experienced darkness, and nighttime crime was horrifyingly common. Thieves preferred darkness because medieval cities became nearly impossible to police after sunset. Some criminals specialized in silently entering sleeping households. Others targeted drunken travelers returning home at night. Murder rates in some medieval cities were shockingly high compared to modern standards. And because medical care was terrible, Even surviving an attack didn't guarantee survival afterward. Small wounds easily became deadly infections. Darkness didn't just hide monsters from legends. It hid real human predators too. Now let's talk about one of the strangest medieval sleeping habits ever: segmented sleep. Historians discovered that many people naturally woke up around midnight after their first sleep. This wasn't insomnia, it was normal. People expected it. During this quiet period, households sometimes sat awake in darkness for 1 or 2 hours before returning to second sleep. Some prayed, some reflected on dreams, some talked quietly by candlelight. Some couples used the time for intimacy because doctors oddly believed midnight wakefulness increased fertility. Imagine your entire house softly awake at 2 a.m. while cold wind rattled wooden walls outside. That atmosphere feels almost surreal today. And because nighttime lasted much longer before electricity, humans spent huge portions of life inside darkness. During winter especially, people could experience 14 or 15 hours of near total night. That changes your psychology. Modern humans live in artificially extended daylight. Medieval humans adapted to long periods of darkness every single day. Fires became emotional centers of the home because they pushed back fear itself. A glowing hearth wasn't just warmth. It was psychological safety. But candles and fires brought another terrifying danger: accidental death. One overturned candle could kill entire families while they slept. Medieval towns burned constantly because homes were packed tightly together and built mostly from wood. Some cities experienced massive nighttime fires that spread uncontrollably before people even realized what was happening. Imagine waking suddenly to smoke filling your tiny room, while flames spread across rooftops outside. There were no fire alarms, no emergency numbers, no fire-resistant materials. Sometimes entire neighborhoods vanished overnight. And honestly, medieval people were deeply aware of how fragile nighttime safety really was. That's why so many rituals developed around sleep. Families prayed before bed every night, asking for divine protection. Some people placed religious symbols near beds to ward off evil spirits. Others believed certain herbs protected sleepers from nightmares or demons. In some places, mirrors were covered at night because people feared spirits could travel through reflections after dark. These rituals sound strange now, but they helped people psychologically survive. A world where darkness felt genuinely dangerous. One shocking thing historians noticed is that medieval people often slept sitting, partially upright instead of lying flat. Some believed lying completely horizontal caused illness or death because it resembled the position of corpses. Wealthier beds were sometimes designed specifically for semi-upright sleeping. Imagine trying to truly rest while propped awkwardly against pillows every night. Medieval sleep was less comfortable than modern people can even imagine. And then there were the sounds. At night, tiny noises became terrifying. A scratching sound inside walls could mean rats. And medieval rats weren't just annoying, they carried disease. Hearing movement near food supplies created panic. Some households kept cats specifically to hunt rodents overnight. Wind against roofs sounded eerie in old wooden buildings, rain dripping through ceilings, distant footsteps outside. dogs suddenly barking in darkness. Humans are naturally wired to notice strange noises at night, and medieval people lived in environments filled with them constantly. But perhaps the saddest part of medieval sleep was exhaustion. Most people worked brutally hard, physical jobs from sunrise until dusk, farming, hauling water, carrying wood, sewing, cooking, repairing tools. Daily life drained the human body completely. Sleep should have felt like relief. Yet for millions of people, nighttime remained physically uncomfortable and psychologically stressful. Poor nutrition, disease, cold temperatures, parasites, fear, and overcrowding meant truly restful sleep was rare. And maybe that's why candles became such powerful, emotional symbols throughout history. A tiny flame beside the bed represented survival itself. It meant warmth, safety, life, hope against darkness. Humans spent thousands of years staring at small fires, while terrifying blackness surrounded them from every direction. Because the medieval world, falling asleep each night required an act of trust. Trust that the roof wouldn't burn. Trust that thieves wouldn't enter. Trust that sickness wouldn't take your family before morning. Trust that whatever waited in the darkness outside would stay outside until sunrise. If you think walking alone at night feels uncomfortable today, imagine doing it in the medieval world. No streetlights, no glowing shop signs, no passing cars, no emergency services, just endless darkness swallowing the road ahead of you. And the terrifying thing is, once the sun disappeared, even familiar places became almost unrecognizable. Roads people used every single day suddenly transformed into dangerous, confusing nightmare-like spaces after sunset. Ancient travelers feared nighttime roads for very good reasons, because in many cases, walking outside after dark genuinely could get you killed. Most medieval roads were terrible even during daytime. They were muddy, uneven, filled with holes, animal waste, and hidden obstacles. Rain often turned them into rivers of sludge. In rural areas, roads were sometimes nothing more than dirt paths, winding through forests or fields. Night, visibility became so poor that travelers could accidentally walk directly into ditches, rivers, or cliffs. And unlike today, there were no reflective signs, maps on your phone, or flashlights guiding the way. Your entire world depended on tiny lanterns or moonlight, and both could fail you instantly. And here's the thing, modern people forget. Moonlight isn't actually that bright. Movies love showing beautiful, glowing blue nights, where everything is still visible, but real moonlight often leaves huge portions of the environment almost completely black. On cloudy nights, ancient roads became terrifying voids. Travelers sometimes couldn't even see where the path continued ahead. Imagine hearing footsteps somewhere nearby, in total darkness, while having absolutely no idea who or what was approaching you. Bandits absolutely loved this. Highway robbery became one of the medieval world's biggest fears, because nighttime roads gave criminals enormous advantages. Armed thieves often hid near forests, bridges, or isolated roads waiting for travelers. Merchants carrying money or goods became prime targets. Some gangs worked together strategically, blocking roads or creating fake emergencies to lure victims closer. And because medieval justice systems were inconsistent and weak in many regions, criminals often escaped punishment entirely. If someone robbed or murdered you on a dark road, there might not even be witnesses. One especially disturbing tactic involved fake cries for help. Some criminals deliberately imitated injured people or frightened women to trick travelers into stopping at night. Imagine hearing someone screaming weakly from the darkness beside a forest road. Do you help them or keep walking? Ancient travelers constantly faced those kinds of decisions, and many people became deeply suspicious of strangers, because trusting the wrong person could end horribly. And honestly, forests at night were a psychological nightmare for medieval humans. Today, forests can feel relaxing during daytime hikes, but ancient forests represented danger, mystery, and death. Wolves, wild boars, bears, criminals, and supernatural fears all became connected to wooded areas. Many medieval stories specifically warned people never to enter forests after dark, because people genuinely vanished there. Dense trees blocked moonlight completely, making visibility almost impossible. Sounds echoed strangely between branches. Wind made forests feel alive. If you got lost inside one at night, survival suddenly became uncertain. And yes, people really did get lost constantly. Travel itself was exhausting and dangerous, long before darkness even entered the picture. Most ordinary people rarely traveled far from home because journeys were difficult, expensive, and risky. Roads lacked clear signs. Weather changed suddenly. Horses became injured. Wheels broke. Bridges collapsed. But nighttime multiplied every danger dramatically. Travelers often rushed desperately to reach inns or towns before sunset, because sleeping outdoors was terrifying. And honestly, for good reason. Sleeping outside at night in ancient times meant exposing yourself to weather, insects, thieves, animals, and freezing temperatures. Travelers sometimes formed groups simply because larger numbers discouraged attacks. Imagine several exhausted strangers huddled beside a tiny campfire in darkness, listening nervously to noises from surrounding woods. That wasn't an adventure movie. That was normal travel. And here's a shocking fact. Medieval inns themselves could be incredibly dangerous too. Travelers hoped inns would provide safety, but many were filthy, overcrowded, and filled with suspicious people. Theft inside inns was common. Some owners secretly worked with criminals targeting wealthy guests. Bed sharing between strangers happened constantly because rooms were limited. Imagine sleeping beside someone you met an hour earlier, while all your money sits hidden beneath your clothes, hoping nobody notices. Travelers often slept lightly out of fear. One creepy detail historians discovered is that medieval cities themselves became strangely unrecognizable at night. Streets twisted unpredictably through cramped neighborhoods. Buildings leaned inward over narrow alleys, blocking moonlight entirely. Without artificial lighting, familiar areas suddenly felt alien. Visitors could easily become lost only a few streets away from where they intended to go. Some cities imposed curfews simply because authorities knew nighttime movement became too chaotic and dangerous. And then there were execution grounds, Many medieval towns placed gallows or execution sites outside city walls near roads, where travelers could see corpses hanging publicly. At night, these places became nightmare-fueled. Bodies sometimes remained hanging for days or weeks as warnings. Imagine passing a dark roadside, gallows under moonlight, while wind moved the dead bodies slightly back and forth. Some people genuinely believed restless spirits haunted those areas. Honestly, even modern humans would struggle psychologically with that image. Superstition made ancient roads even scarier. Medieval travelers carried charms, crosses, herbs, and religious symbols for protection, because many believed evil spirits wandered at night. Strange lights seen in swamps or forests became ghost stories. Sudden fog terrified people because visibility vanished completely. Hearing unexplained noises in darkness triggered immediate panic. And because scientific explanations barely existed, human imagination filled every shadow with monsters. One especially fascinating fear involved crossroads. In many parts of Europe, crossroads were considered supernatural places linked to spirits, witches, and demons. Criminals or suicides were sometimes buried there because people feared their souls wouldn't rest properly. Travelers passing crossroads at night often felt deeply uneasy due to centuries of terrifying folklore attached to those places. It's strange how certain locations still feel creepy today, without us fully understanding why. Ancient fears linger psychologically far longer than people realize. Weather transformed roads into horror scenes too. Imagine medieval travel during heavy rain at night, mud sucking at your boots, cold wind soaking your clothes, lantern flames barely surviving gusts, horses panicking from thunder, roads disappearing beneath flooding water. Travelers sometimes died simply from exposure after becoming stranded overnight in storms. Hypothermia was a real danger, long before people even understood the condition scientifically. And perhaps the worst nights of all were foggy ones. Fog terrified ancient people because it erased the world around them. Sounds became distorted, shapes appeared suddenly, then vanished again. Travelers lost all sense of direction. Criminals used fog strategically because victims couldn't see danger approaching. Imagine hearing another person breathing somewhere nearby while thick fog hides everything beyond a few feet. Your brain would instantly begin imagining the worst possible scenario. One disturbing medieval reality people rarely discuss is how vulnerable women were during travel. Women traveling alone at night faced enormous risks from assault, kidnapping, or violence. Many simply avoided solo travel entirely, unless absolutely necessary. Families often arranged escorts or group travel because darkness removed almost every layer of protection society could offer. Even wealthy travelers weren't safe. Nobles and merchants carrying valuables became attractive targets. Some hired armed guards specifically for nighttime journeys. Others disguised themselves to avoid attention. There are records of travelers hiding money inside clothing, shoes, or even sewn into fabrics because robbery was so common. Imagine constantly wondering whether strangers around you secretly plan to kill you for your belongings. And honestly, ancient roads reveal something important about human psychology. Modern humans feel powerful Because technology surrounds us constantly. GPS tells us where we are. Flashlights remove darkness instantly. Emergency services exist. Cameras monitor streets. But ancient travelers experienced something modern people rarely feel anymore. Genuine helplessness against the environment. Once darkness arrived, humans lost control frighteningly fast. That's why sunrise meant so much emotionally in the ancient world. Morning wasn't just another part of the day. It was relief. The roads became visible again. Forests stopped feeling haunted. Travelers emerged from hiding places. Merchants reopened markets. People breathed easier. Because surviving the night outside, your home in the medieval world often felt like surviving something alive. One of the strangest things about ancient nighttime fear is this. People weren't only afraid of real dangers, they were also terrified of things they believed existed just beyond the edge of the firelight. And honestly, when you live in a world filled with darkness, disease, sudden death, and almost no scientific explanations, your imagination becomes incredibly powerful. Medieval people didn't see monsters as entertainment. They saw them as possibilities, real possibilities. The night wasn't just dark to them. It felt inhabited. Today, if you hear a strange sound at night, your brain usually searches for logical explanations first. Maybe it's the house settling. Maybe it's a neighbor outside. Maybe the cat knocked something over. But ancient humans often jumped straight to supernatural explanations because their world already felt mysterious and unpredictable. Crops failed suddenly. Plagues appeared without warning. Healthy people died overnight. Storms destroyed entire villages. In a reality that already felt chaotic, believing unseen creatures wandered the darkness didn't seem ridiculous at all. And honestly, some medieval legends were absolutely terrifying. One of the most widespread nighttime fears across Europe involved demons sitting on sleeping people while they rested. This belief appeared in many cultures with slightly different names and descriptions, but the idea stayed eerily similar. A dark entity attacked sleepers during the night, causing pressure on the chest, terrifying dreams, and paralysis. Sound familiar? Historians now connect many of these stories to sleep paralysis. But medieval people had no scientific framework for understanding it. Imagine waking in complete darkness, unable to move while feeling a heavy force pressing onto your body. You try to scream, but nothing comes out. Shadows seem to move nearby. In today's world, people still find sleep paralysis horrifying. In the medieval world, it became proof that evil spirits existed. And then there were witches. Few things terrified medieval communities more than the idea of witches wandering after dark. Many believed witches gathered secretly at night to perform rituals, summon demons, poison livestock, or curse families. Some people genuinely feared seeing strange lights in forests because they thought witches held hidden ceremonies there. Others blamed unexplained illnesses or accidents on supernatural attacks. During periods of intense paranoia, entire communities turned against vulnerable women accused of witchcraft. And the truly disturbing part, fear itself became contagious. Once people started believing evil forces operated nearby, every unusual event suddenly confirmed their suspicions. A cow dies unexpectedly. Witchcraft. A child becomes sick? Witchcraft. Someone sleepwalks at night? Definitely witchcraft. Darkness amplified fear until ordinary life became filled with hidden threats. And medieval people weren't only afraid of human witches, they also feared creatures hidden in forests, rivers, mountains, and abandoned ruins. Folklore exploded with terrifying beings, designed specifically to warn people against wandering outside at night. Some legends described pale spirits luring travelers off roads. Others warned about creatures mimicking human voices to trap victims in forests. Across Europe, stories emerged about black dogs with glowing eyes, appearing on lonely roads before death or disaster. Imagine hearing growling somewhere, behind you on a foggy road while carrying only a tiny lantern. Your imagination would do the rest. One especially creepy belief involved revenants, corpses believed to rise from graves at night. Long before modern vampire stories became popular, medieval Europeans already feared the dead returning to harm the living. Some believed certain people couldn't rest peacefully after death, and wandered, villages spreading disease or terror. In some regions, graves were disturbed and bodies mutilated because communities genuinely feared the dead would return. Historians discovered skeletons buried with stones, stuffed into mouths or bodies pinned down to prevent them from rising. Think about how psychologically frightened people must have been to do that. And honestly, medieval cemeteries at night probably did look terrifying. Unlike modern graveyards, medieval burial grounds were often overcrowded, poorly maintained, and directly beside churches or villages. Bones sometimes became exposed due to shallow graves or flooding. During plague periods especially, death surrounded everyday life constantly. Imagine passing a cemetery after dark, hearing wind move through crooked grave markers, while fog rolls across uneven ground. It's not hard to understand how ghost stories developed. The medieval obsession with death shaped nighttime fear deeply. Modern people often avoid thinking about mortality, but ancient humans couldn't escape it. Death happened publicly and frequently. Executions were common. Disease killed children constantly. Women died during childbirth at horrifying rates. Corpses remained visible in communities far more often than today. As a result, nighttime became emotionally linked to mortality itself. Darkness symbolized the unknown waiting beyond human life. And perhaps no place terrified medieval people more than forests after sunset. Forests represented everything humans couldn't control. Wild animals, criminals, isolation, strange sounds, supernatural legends. During daytime, forests already felt intimidating. At night, they became almost psychologically unbearable. Trees blocked moonlight, completely creating moving shadows everywhere. Wind through branches sounded like whispers or footsteps. Travelers easily became lost. Many legends specifically described forests as places where reality itself felt distorted after dark. Some people genuinely believed forests contained gateways to supernatural worlds. And honestly, there's something ancient inside, the human brain, that still reacts nervously to dark forests even now. Our ancestors spent thousands of years learning that visibility, disappearing among trees, could mean danger. Medieval folklore simply gave names and faces to fears humans already carried instinctively. One disturbing legend, common throughout Europe, involved creatures stealing children at night. Parents warned children never to wander outside after sunset because spirits, witches, or monsters supposedly targeted young people specifically. While these stories sound fantastical today, they often reflected real dangers underneath. Darkness truly did make children vulnerable to accidents, kidnappings, wild animals, or exposure. Folklore became a terrifying survival tool, and then came the devil himself. Medieval Christianity heavily emphasized spiritual warfare between good and evil. Many people sincerely believed demons constantly searched for human souls to corrupt. Priests warned communities that sinful behavior invited evil forces closer. Nighttime naturally became associated with temptation because darkness hid actions from public view. Gambling, drinking, crime, secret meetings, and forbidden relationships often happened after sunset. Over time, people psychologically connected nighttime with moral danger too. One especially unsettling fact is that medieval people often interpreted mental illness as supernatural activity. Conditions we now recognize as epilepsy, psychosis, depression, or hallucinations were sometimes blamed on possession or curses. If someone screamed at unseen figures during the night or behaved strangely after dark, communities might genuinely believe demons were involved. Fear and misunderstanding created horrifying consequences for vulnerable individuals. And strangely enough, certain animals became deeply connected to fear because of nighttime behavior. Owls terrified many medieval communities because they appeared silently in darkness, making eerie sounds humans associated with death or evil spirits. Black cats became linked to witches, partly because they moved so quietly at night. Bats frightened people because they emerged suddenly from darkness, behaving unpredictably. Medieval humans constantly searched nature for signs and symbols, and nighttime animals often became trapped inside superstition. But perhaps the creepiest thing of all is how darkness itself changes the human mind. Modern neuroscience shows humans become more anxious in low-visibility environments because our brains evolved to detect threats visually. When we can't clearly see surroundings, imagination begins filling gaps automatically. Medieval people experienced this constantly. A coat hanging in darkness became a figure. Wind became whispering. Shadows seemed to move independently. Fear transformed ordinary environments into supernatural landscapes. And honestly, maybe ancient people weren't completely wrong about nighttime changing reality. That's why fires mattered so much. A fire wasn't just warmth. It was protection against unseen things, against fear, against imagination, against darkness swallowing the edges of human safety. Because for thousands of years, once the final candle burned low and silence filled the room, humans everywhere shared the same unsettling thought. What might be waiting outside tonight? When people imagine medieval cities, they often picture something beautiful, warm candlelight glowing through windows, stone streets, cozy taverns, maybe a little rain falling dramatically, while someone in a cloak walks through the night. And honestly, movies have completely lied to us. Because real medieval cities after dark were not charming. They were filthy, dangerous, overcrowded, and deeply unsettling places to be trapped inside once the sun disappeared. The first thing that would hit you wasn't the darkness, it was the smell. Modern cities smell bad sometimes, sure. But medieval cities were operating on an entirely different level of horror. There were no proper sewage systems in most places. Human waste, animal waste, rotting food, dead rats, smoke, mud, blood from butcher shops, and stagnant water all mixed together in the streets. During daytime, this was already disgusting. But at night, when cold, damp air trapped smells close to the ground and visibility disappeared, cities became almost nightmarish sensory experiences. Imagine walking through narrow alleyways where you can barely see your feet, while stepping through mud that might not actually be mud. And here's the horrifying part. People often dumped chamber pots directly into the street from upstairs windows. Yes, actual human waste. In some cities, people shouted warnings before throwing it out at night. In others, they didn't bother. Imagine wandering through darkness and suddenly getting hit by someone's toilet contents falling from above. That genuinely happened. Constantly. Romantic. Medieval aesthetics die pretty fast once you realize the streets were basically open sewers. And because cities were tightly packed together, darkness created claustrophobic environments. Buildings leaned inward over narrow streets, blocking moonlight almost completely. Some alleyways became so dark after sunset that travelers carried lanterns even during full moons. The deeper you moved into poorer districts, the worse conditions became. Crowded wooden homes pressed tightly together, tiny windows, damp walls, smoke lingering in the air, rats moving constantly beneath floorboards and through trash piles. The rats are important, by the way, because medieval cities had a serious rat problem. Not a few rats in the alley problem. More like entire populations of rats living alongside humans permanently problem. Food scraps everywhere allowed rodents to thrive. At night, rats became incredibly active. People heard scratching inside walls constantly while trying to sleep. Some historians believe medieval people simply accepted rats as unavoidable parts of life. Imagine waking in darkness, feeling something small run across your blanket. That wasn't rare. That was normal. And of course, rats eventually became linked forever with one of the worst nightmares in human history, the Black Death. When plague swept through Europe during the 1300s, cities transformed into places of pure terror. Nighttime became especially horrifying because people often woke to discover family members dead beside them by morning. Bells rang constantly for funerals. Carts collected corpses from streets. Entire households vanished within days. Imagine lying awake at night hearing distant coughing through thin walls, while knowing a deadly disease was spreading invisibly through your city. Every sound suddenly became threatening. One disturbing historical detail is that plague doctors and priests sometimes walked cities at night responding to emergencies because death never stopped for daylight. Lanterns moving through dark, foggy streets became symbols of fear itself. If someone knocked on your door after midnight during plague years, it probably wasn't good news. And medieval nights weren't just physically dangerous. They were psychologically exhausting too. Cities became strangely lawless after dark. Many people avoided leaving home, entirely unless absolutely necessary, because crime exploded at night. Drunken fights, robberies, assaults, and murders became far more common once visibility disappeared. Wealthier citizens hired servants or guards, specifically to accompany them outside after sunset. Ordinary people simply stayed indoors, hoping trouble passed elsewhere. And honestly, authorities struggled to control anything after dark. There were no street cameras, no electric lighting, no quick communication systems. Some towns hired watchmen carrying lanterns and bells, but they couldn't monitor every street. Criminals understood this perfectly. Darkness gave anonymity, and in overcrowded medieval cities filled with twisting alleyways, escaping pursuit wasn't difficult. One especially creepy aspect of medieval cities involved curfews. In many places, bells rang at certain hours signaling citizens to extinguish fires and return indoors. The word curfew itself actually comes from old laws, ordering household fires, covered at night to reduce fire risks. Think about how eerie that atmosphere must have been, a giant bell echoing across dark rooftops, while entire cities slowly shut themselves inside before darkness deepened further. Because fire terrified medieval cities almost as much as plague did. Most urban buildings were wooden, packed tightly together, and lit by candles or open flames constantly. One accident could destroy entire neighborhoods overnight, and it happened again and again throughout history. Fires spread unbelievably fast through crowded streets. Wind carried flames across rooftops, while panicked citizens fled through smoke-filled alleys. Imagine waking suddenly to screams. Outside, while orange, firelight glows through cracks in your shutters. Entire medieval cities disappeared in single nights. And here's a shocking fact. Sometimes people intentionally started fires during crimes or wars because medieval cities were so vulnerable. Arson became an incredibly effective weapon. During riots or invasions, darkness combined with fire created absolute chaos. But maybe the most disturbing thing about medieval urban life was how little privacy existed. Noise traveled everywhere through thin walls and crowded streets. At night, people overheard arguments, crying, drunken shouting, coughing, praying, and even deaths happening nearby. Entire neighborhoods lived almost on top of each other. The emotional stress of constant overcrowding must have been enormous. And then there were executions. Public executions were common entertainment in many medieval cities, and execution sites often remained visible long afterward. Bodies hung publicly as warnings, heads displayed on spikes above gates. Imagine returning home through foggy streets after sunset, while passing the silhouette of an executed criminal hanging nearby. Medieval cities constantly reminded people how fragile life was. One deeply unsettling detail historians discovered is that many people feared certain city districts at night almost like cursed territory. Poor neighborhoods, abandoned areas, graveyards, docks, and tavern districts developed terrifying reputations. Some streets became associated with murders or ghost stories. Travelers unfamiliar with cities risked wandering accidentally into dangerous zones after dark. And because lighting was so limited, human faces themselves looked frightening at night. Candlelight distorts expressions, shadows deepen eye sockets. Movement appears strange and sudden. Imagine encountering strangers emerging, silently from fog carrying flickering lanterns. Medieval nighttime interactions must have felt surreal compared to modern city life. Even sounds became psychologically disturbing. Horses clattering suddenly through darkness, distant screams echoing between buildings, church bells ringing unexpectedly after midnight, dogs barking wildly somewhere unseen, drunk singing from taverns fading into silence, wind rattling shutters, footsteps following behind you in narrow alleys. Ancient cities never truly slept peacefully. And perhaps the strangest part is this. Despite all the fear and discomfort, people still found ways to socialize at night. Taverns filled with drinking, gambling, storytelling, and music. Secret meetings happened after dark. Criminal networks operated quietly in hidden corners. Couples met privately away from public judgment. Human life continued inside the darkness because it had to, but nighttime transformed everyone psychologically. A friendly street during daylight could feel threatening after sunset. Familiar neighbors became suspicious figures in shadow. Ordinary buildings looked eerie under moonlight. Medieval humans constantly shifted between two versions of their cities. The daytime world they recognized, and the nighttime version they endured. And honestly, maybe that's why old cities still feel strangely haunted today. Not because ghosts truly linger there, but because for centuries, millions of frightened humans filled those streets after dark, carrying fear, grief, disease, violence, superstition, and survival instincts deep inside their minds. Medieval cities absorbed human anxiety night after night for generations. And if you stood alone in one of those narrow streets after midnight, hearing distant bells echo through cold fog while candlelight flickered weakly from crooked windows, you probably would have walked a little faster too. After hearing how terrifying ancient nights were, you might start wondering something very simple. How did people mentally survive this every single day? Because honestly, humans aren't designed to live comfortably inside constant fear. And yet for thousands of years, our ancestors spent nearly half their lives surrounded by darkness, uncertainty, and danger. So over time, people developed strange rituals, habits, beliefs, and nighttime traditions that helped them feel safer. Some were practical, some were superstitious, and some were honestly kind of unsettling. One of the most important survival tools humans created was light itself, not just for visibility, emotionally. Modern people completely underestimate how comforting artificial light really is, because we've never lived without it. But ancient humans deeply understood the psychological power of a tiny flame. A candle in a dark room wasn't decoration. It represented protection, control, safety against the unknown. Families gathered around fires at night, not only for warmth, but because darkness beyond the firelight felt emotionally oppressive. And honestly, humans still do this today. Think about it. Even now, people leave TVs on while sleeping. Children want night lights. Campfires feel comforting. During blackouts, anxiety rises almost immediately. Somewhere deep inside us, ancient fear of darkness still exists. Medieval people simply experienced it far more intensely. Because candles were expensive, ordinary families used them carefully. Wealthier households could afford beeswax candles that burned cleaner and brighter. Poor families often relied on cheaper tallow candles made from animal fat, and these smelled terrible. Some reportedly produced thick smoke and disgusting odors while burning. Imagine your entire room smelling, faintly like burning meat, every night, while shadows danced across the walls. Cozy medieval aesthetics suddenly become less cozy, and fires had to be managed constantly. People feared flames almost as much as darkness itself, because one accident could destroy homes instantly. Before bed, families carefully checked hearths, covered embers, and monitored candles. Some towns even created nighttime fire patrols because urban fires became so catastrophic. Imagine trying to sleep while worrying your own light source might kill everyone in the house before morning. To protect themselves psychologically, medieval people filled nighttime with rituals. Many prayed before sleeping every single night, asking God for protection from illness, demons, thieves, bad dreams, and sudden death. Bedtime prayers weren't casual traditions. They reflected genuine fear. Some households sprinkled holy water near beds. Others hung religious symbols over doors or windows, believing evil forces couldn't cross sacred spaces. And honestly, when you live in a terrifying environment, rituals become emotionally powerful, even if they don't physically change anything. Humans crave the feeling of control. That's why superstitions exploded around nighttime behavior. Some people believed whistling after dark attracted spirits. Others thought mirrors should be covered at night, because souls could become trapped inside reflections. In certain places, leaving shoes upside down before sleeping supposedly invited bad luck or death. Many families developed tiny habits repeated every night simply because they felt protective. And then there were protective herbs. Medieval people loved using plants against imagined supernatural threats. Lavender, rosemary, garlic, sage, and other herbs were placed near beds or hung around homes because people believed they repelled evil spirits, witches, disease, or nightmares. Garlic especially became legendary throughout Europe long before vampire stories made it famous. Some believed strong smells confused or repelled dark forces wandering at night, which honestly reveals something fascinating about humans. When facing fear we can't fully understand, we instinctively create comforting systems around ourselves. Even storytelling became survival. At night, families gathered around fires telling stories, not just for entertainment, but companionship. Darkness feels less frightening when humans share it together. Ancient storytelling traditions exploded after sunset because nighttime naturally encouraged imagination. Ghost stories, legends, myths, religious tales all became tools helping communities emotionally process fear and uncertainty. And some stories were intentionally terrifying. Parents warned children about monsters, demons, forest spirits, or witches specifically to stop them wandering outside after dark. These tales sound cruel today, but they often reflected genuine dangers underneath. Ancient nighttime environments really were dangerous for children. Folklore became an early form of survival education, wrapped inside horror. One especially strange nighttime tradition involved bells. Church bells played enormous roles in medieval life. Bells marked time, warned of danger, announced deaths, signaled curfews, and guided lost travelers through fog or darkness. Some communities genuinely believed bell sounds drove away demons or evil weather. During storms, church bells sometimes rang specifically to protect towns spiritually. Imagine lying awake at night, hearing distant bells echo across dark hills during a thunderstorm. Honestly, that atmosphere sounds straight out of a horror movie. And speaking of storms, humans developed bizarre methods for surviving fear during violent weather. Thunder terrified medieval communities because people viewed storms as supernatural events. Lightning strikes seemed random and unstoppable. Some believed storms represented divine punishment. Others blamed witches for summoning destructive weather. Families prayed intensely during storms, while fires flickered and rain hammered rooftops. Without modern understanding of weather, storms felt alive. Animals also became emotional protectors against nighttime fear. Dogs were especially valued because barking warned families about strangers or danger outside. Cats protected food supplies from rats. Horses sensed movement or threats before humans noticed them. Ancient households depended emotionally on animals far more than modern people realize. And then there's one of the weirdest medieval sleeping habits ever: communal sleeping for safety. Today, privacy feels normal. Ancient humans often found privacy uncomfortable at night. Entire families slept together. Servants slept near employers. Travelers shared beds with strangers. Monks slept in large shared rooms. Being physically close to others created emotional security against darkness.